we're building new functions within our business that didn't exist before, right? And we'll meet great people who actually could be really good candidates to work in this function who we say no to today. And I mean, like, very good, highly skilled people who would be great and we would love to work in this company, who we say no to because they're not right to be the first person in this function. The first person that comes into the function needs to be able to come in and set and build the infrastructure, right? They need to come in, they need to have seen what does a successful rollout of this function look like from another company, right? What have I seen that's worked? Where have I worked that did this well? Ideally a couple of places, what worked, and then go set that up and then ignore what didn't work. If you go and bring in someone to lead like a function or be the first person in a function that doesn't exist and that doesn't have that background, then sure, like maybe they can bubble their way there. One, it's slower. And then two, they're probably going to make a whole bunch of mistakes that somebody with experience just wouldn't make.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 131 of the Startup Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Rohit Bhargava, and each week I interview successful founders, investors, and subject matter experts on how they got started, the strategies they use to succeed, and their advice to current and future entrepreneurs. I was initially meant to interview Open founder Jason Wilby for this episode, but as you can tell from my voice, I've been down with a throat infection for the last few weeks. Thankfully, Jason has agreed to come back on the podcast in a few weeks, but in the meantime, I'm delighted to have the co-founder and CEO of Fast, Domm Holland, as my guest for this episode. Domm was previously the founder and CEO of on-demand towing platform Tow, which processed over $50 million in transactions. He is now the co-founder and CEO of Fast, the world's fastest online login and checkout platform. Despite being founded only 18 months ago, Fast has grown rapidly over this time period, growing from a team of 2 to over 65 and raising over $22.5 million in funding, led by Stripe, and with further contributions from Index and Susa Ventures. In this interview, we covered a wide range of topics, including the importance of building organic relationships, why Fast prescribes to building out loud, why Fast ignored all inbound leads to focus on building their outbound sales strategies, the key traits that you should look for when making your first hires into new segments, and much more. Without further ado, here's my interview with Domm Holland. Domm, welcome to the Startup Playbook podcast, and thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here.
So Domm, for those people that may not be as familiar with you or your background, do you want to share a little bit about your story and what got you here today?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of Fast. I started Fast in March 2019. So we've been going for about 18 months now. The genesis of the company is I'm married with 2 little kids and my youngest son was in hospital for a few weeks. We had my wife's grandmother staying with us. And one night she was sitting at our kitchen table ordering groceries, forgot a password, couldn't check out. I just remember thinking it was a preposterous thing to see. I built a prototype for a passwordless authentication system. I put on Product Hunt, had tens of thousands of people use it in a couple of days, realized huge opportunity here. The world, there was something fundamentally broken about the internet. I spent sort of months kind of thinking about the problem, not actively working on it, not actively building a company, and realized that I really wanted to do something. I wanted to solve the problem, and that the problem was far bigger than passwords. The problem was that this internet fundamentally lacks an identity layer, which means every website asks us for a new password, recreate ourselves, fill in forms, put our name and date of birth as if it's new when it's decades old piece of information. And so I kicked off in March 2019, and we've been growing really fast ever since then. So yeah, it's been an amazing journey.
Yeah, as you mentioned, absolutely incredible journey, which we'll obviously dive into over the last 18 months. But, this isn't your first rodeo. You've been, over the last few years, you've been running various businesses. Really curious to know, what are some of the things that you sort of learned from some of your background that has kind of helped shape your thinking or your approach to the way that you're building Fast?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've been programming for 18, 19 years, been hacking together computers and building computers and pretty much anything, even before computers. As a kid, I was sort of ripping apart TVs that I found on the side of the road and trying to put them back together again. I've always been very interested in building and fixing and making and just finding out how stuff works. And then, in my sort of teen years, I really just realized that I like this commercial part of the world too, right? I like to sell things and I like to talk to things and take, something you build or make and take it and bring it to life and get people using it and kind of selling it into people and companies. And so my whole life has pretty much been doing that, whether I've been doing that internally at large corporates as like an entrepreneur and, building solutions within companies and not necessarily as an engineer. I could be working in sort of accounting or sales or like different roles. And I've worked in fraud and credit in a bunch of different places, but building solutions within those companies to kind of do things more innovatively and then, seeing the fruits of those labors. And then about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I decided I wanted to work for myself. I didn't want to keep, selling and making money for big corporates unless it was, my big corporate. I wanted to sort of go out and do my own thing. And I spent some time I spent a few months here in Silicon Valley, and then I kind of learned a bunch about building product to solve problems. And I came back to Australia and I just started building, I guess, like small tech-centric businesses, not really startups per se, but just companies that built tech solutions to problems and built clienteles and bases and did lots of interesting work on, automotive and lots of different sectors. And then in 2014, I partnered with a couple other people who owned a car auction, launched a venture called Tow, which was an on-demand towing platform. Did $50 million in revenue in 4 years. It was bootstrapped, largely bootstrapped. We had a sort of original angel investment of about 500 grand, and scaled that business really quickly over a number of years. And it taught me a lot. Everything I've done has sort of taught me a lot about moving to the next stage, but about managing people, about building product, about scaling engineering, scaling infrastructure, and marketing and building sales teams. And so I think everything I've learned along the way has made the next phase easier, and it taught me things that I could sort of build upon. And I definitely think that all the sort of success that we're having here at Fast wouldn't be possible without the sort of prior learnings. I think that whether it's failures in the past or just things that I've learned, successes in the past have all really played a part in helping shape and really one of the primary drivers as to why we're growing so as a company now.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think I heard that you started, kind of were a self-taught developer by the age of 14, and obviously you kind of have a really interesting background in sales as well. And it's really interesting that you kind of really talk passionately about sort of both the product and the sales side of things. How important has that been sort of from your perspective in terms of the way that you sort of maybe approach or kind of look at particular problems as well, in terms of having both the product and kind of the sales background in how you approach different startup ideas?
I think in startup, it's really important, whether you're kind of technical or not, but to have a really strong product understanding is really important. And the absolute, in every startup, the first salesperson should be the founder, right? Or one of the founders. The feedback loop is much shorter. Really, when we first launched, we were only offering a one-click login product. It makes a lot of sense for e-commerce. A third of all transactions are abandoned purely because of passwords. So the product makes sense, right? Just with your product hat on, that seems to be a product that you'd want to go out and sell. The reality from talking firsthand to customers, and something that no one would ever articulate to me, but I managed to sort of figure out early, was that in e-commerce, average store only has like a 4% conversion rate. On average, only half of the audience are, about half the audience may be returning customers. So only 2% of a site's audience are logging in. So it's hard for an e-commerce, site to justify spending any resource on optimizing for 2% of their audience, despite the sort of money, potential that it could bring. So even though as a founder, as a product person, it's sort of intuitive that optimizing that 2% could generate like an extra 50% of revenue for you. The reality is that's just not the way like an e-commerce operator's brand is working. And so rather than sort of, stand on the hill and die, trying to preach that, build a product that is going to work. And so, one-click checkout is really just the extension of our one-click login. It just has more profile information and payment attached. When you do the one-click, we authenticate you, transfer money and transfer data. And I think it's like a really critical, it's just like a very effective weapon at growing a business quickly, is shortening that feedback loop. And of course, the better you can sell, then the bigger the customer base you can gain, whether it's early or ongoing. And I think that all too often companies are sort of very much led by a specific function. They either think that, marketing can be strong and sales is kind of a dirty word or something like that. And, or it's an engineering led. And so it doesn't really matter about marketing or design led and engineering doesn't matter. And, for us, I think we're just very well disciplined right across the board. And product, engineering, design, marketing, sales, organic marketing, paid marketing. And, I think we really just focus on each area individually.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but you mentioned, the initial kind of concept for Fast was around, the one-click login. And
Mm-hmm.
my understanding, from talking to your customers, you realized that actually the bigger opportunity was in checkout, especially when you can attach like a dollar value to sort of engagement around that. I guess for anyone that's sort of looking at you now or looking at Fast now, it's, you have a very clear message in terms of that. But obviously there must have been sort of an evolution process from when you sort of first identify that opportunity, talking to customers, and then realizing that sort of opportunity in the checkout space. What did that sort of process look like for you to refine and have a really clear articulation of what the real problem is that you wanted to go after?
I honestly, I took quite an easy process. It's just saying what's your biggest pain point. Like if you just ask your customers their biggest pain point, they'll typically tell you. And for head of e-commerce or the e-commerce operators of retail businesses, the reality is that checkout is the number one pain point. Like the whole point of e-commerce is taking a product and selling it. The selling it component is kind of really difficult, right? And the most friction. And every seller in the world wants to decrease friction to increase conversion rate, right? Every buyer in the world wants to decrease friction to stop filling in forms and like stop going through this like long, annoying process. Abandonment rates are 80 to 85% on average for every single e-commerce store in the world, whether you're the largest that turn over tens of billions of dollars a year, or the smallest that turn over thousands or hundreds of dollars a year. Same thing. They both have this abandonment problem, and it's actually a really easy thing to see. Maybe some sectors and some products it would be harder for them to articulate the problem, but for us it was like we just attacked the largest problem in e-commerce. But it's actually the same problem, right? So the problem of logging in again is this identity issue, right? Is that like every site needs to re-identify you as a person. Checkout is actually the exact same problem. So they need to re-identify you as a customer so that they can take your money, right? And basically everything we do online is this identity problem. It's about every time you want to fill in a form, again, you've got to give the same information that's just part of your identity because they don't have it. They need their own siloed version of your data. And so we're actually solving the exact same problem. We're just adding more attributes to our solution for them. And so it was really clear that it was always clear from the outset, even before talking to customers, that checkout would be like our evolution. The reality was that we just sped up the timeline. It was no brainer that when we would hear the problems that retailers were saying about checkout, we said if we could tie our product to checkout and give you one-click checkout, would that be a product you'd want? It was every retailer in the world stuck their hand up, and so it was obviously apparent that we needed to accelerate the timeline to bring that to market.
Yeah. And obviously you're joining us for this interview from SF as well.
Yep.
And I think you moved there towards the end of 2019, if I have that right?
Yeah, officially moved here in November last year. Yep.
Yeah, for most Australian founders or kind of anyone that's based out of the US wanting to move to SF, the main reason why they try and move there is because of the funding and obviously the access to talent. Really curious to know what were some of the reasons that sort of led you to wanting to move to SF, and how's that sort of approach been for you since being there in November last year?
Yeah, talent and capital. That the ecosystem here is definitely like that driver, and talent capital are the two primary drivers within the ecosystem. The reality is that we're building a consumer network scale business. We want to serve billions of people, but in the sort of longer term, but in the short to medium term, like hundreds of millions of people. Like next year, probably tens of millions of consumers will be using fast checkout. The reality is, Australia's got some great engineers, great product people, great talented people. We just don't have people who've got a lot of experience working at that scale, like plainly and simply. And there's one city in the world which very uniquely has this incredible density of people who have worked at that scale, and that's San Francisco and the whole Bay Area. I could throw a stone out the window here and hit 500 people that have worked at that sort of scale. There's lots and lots of companies here that have. And so that it is an incredible driver for us because, as you're growing, to build a fast growing company, there's a lot of things you just need to work out, right? There's no playbook for like, a startup that's done exactly what we want to do. It's, as with almost any startup. But the reality is that there's people who've had roles in businesses that have similar characteristics, whether it's the operational growth or whether it's the technical infrastructure to scale to consumers, consumer interactions, or lots of different things. And so if you can take people who've already had those learnings and seen around the corners that are coming, then you can scale much faster because there's less learning for those people to do, and they can be aware of like what's about to come next. And so it's a really effective strategy and something, that over time, the Australian ecosystem will get more of these people who have that experience. But at the moment, that's the biggest infancy. And I think the number one thing we need to do is attract more big tech companies into Australia, like to set up, Asia Pacific hubs in Australia and start getting more of that talent locally. And I think COVID's a great forcing function at trying to speed that up. So that's the biggest thing Australian lacks, and that here is amazing. And obviously funding. Yeah, there's more funding here. It is, it's not, I wouldn't say it's easier to raise here. It's probably more competitive than Australia, but they're more sophisticated technology investors. They do better understand the sort of risk-taking profile needed for like large venture bets than Australian investors typically. And there's just a lot more capital available. But at the same time, you're serving a bigger market. So in Australia, you just couldn't justify having that amount of capital in Australia because the market's too small to kind of, warrant investing at that level.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on COVID, and obviously, this year we've kind of seen a bit more, an acceleration towards sort of remote work and those sort of things as well. So I guess, given everything that's happened this year, do you expect, the importance of being based locally in SF to be the same moving forward for founders who are potentially thinking of making that switch over?
I don't know. I talk about this all the time. I really, I think that there's a lot of, wanderlust of people outside the Bay Area thinking that COVID's going to be like a democratization of Silicon Valley, right? There's suddenly the capital that was, the majority of the capital is sitting in Silicon Valley will suddenly like spread all around the world. The majority of the talent was in Silicon Valley was suddenly spread all around the world. I think the reality is that, some of that is going to be true. There's capital maybe into, Texas and other places. But again, Australia is not going to suddenly have, lots of billion-dollar funds because where are they going to deploy? There's not many industries in Australia worth that amount of money, right? Let alone that could support one company that would be worth that amount of money. So it's just going to be hard to deploy like large amounts of capital there. It's not saying that they wouldn't deploy any, but it couldn't support the same ecosystem. But the other thing is that I really hope that we don't see that sort of mass exodus, that people are talking about. There's obviously some people leaving, but it would be a sad state because I think the reality is all it will mean is that there'll never again be that place that just happens to spit out like very large, very successful tech companies repeatedly. If you take away, if everyone gets 1,000th of the impact of Silicon Valley, it's not going to produce a whole bunch of Googles because you need the ecosystem to do that, right? You need that big ecosystem that's capable of doing that. And so I really think that and hope, I guess, more so that Silicon Valley does still, continue to be this sort of wonderful tech place. And definitely there's going to be a lot of capital here for a long time. There's going to be a lot of engineering talent here for a long time. You imagine if you're an engineer here that's been here for 10 years working at Google, sure, COVID hit, you're not actually living in San Francisco. You're probably living down the South Bay, which is a much nicer place to live anyway. And, it's only an hour away or, whatever. And the reality is that you probably got kids that are in school. You probably got a partner that works, as well. And so it's like hard. People aren't going to like jumping up and getting in a caravan and moving to the other side of the country willy-nilly, even though some people may move. So I definitely think that there's still going to be something, said about being in Silicon Valley and launching a business. But it's not necessary for every type of business. If you're building an enterprise B2B SaaS company, maybe you don't have to be here. Like you could do that from any part of the world. You're not building like a consumer network scale business, that you could have a small handful of customers that deliver, really large revenues. And perhaps you could do that from anywhere and it doesn't have the same impact. I think there's certain types of businesses which really thrive here. And there's others that really could be built anywhere.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point as well, is that just because it's done one way for one company doesn't mean it's the right approach for you. You really
Completely.
understand
Yeah.
what is it that you're trying to build, and what's sort of the right approach for you as well. So on that, Dom, obviously we've kind of touched on the fundraising and the capital aspect of that. Obviously, it's been a very sort of interesting year by all accounts, but Fast has obviously done exceptionally well to attract sort of investor interest. I believe that you had a seed round that you sort of closed at the end of last year, and then within a few months you'd sort of closed your Series A, so a total of $22.5 million in funding so far. Do you mind sharing what your sort of funding journey was like, especially from, I guess, an outsider coming into San Francisco, and what did that sort of process look like in sort of getting those initial meetings and getting investors to buy in at a time when, I guess things are a little bit more unsure in the market?
Yeah, so before I came to the US, so I came to the US in June. I officially lived here in November, but I came on just like an ESTA visa, so visa waiver. So Australians can get 90 days in the US, and I did that from June to November. And I actually wasn't raising capital. So before in May, I raised a sort of friends and family angel round in out of people, larger people in Sydney, high net worths in Sydney, raised 600,000 Australian, about 400,000 American, and then I caught the next flight to Silicon Valley, and I came here in June and just started building networks. I wanted to headquarter the company here. I wanted to really build, base and foundation before I moved the family. And so that's what I was here to do, and start building networks. And so it's just meeting interesting people, like, heads of sales for different companies, heads of engineering, just, senior engineers, anyone who would be sort of interesting to our journey, and telling them, what the plan for what we're going to build is. And one of the people I met was, Allison, my now co-founder, who I wasn't out looking for a co-founder, who was running the head of global product operations for Uber and Uber's money team. And I just reached, like a lot of people, I reached out on either LinkedIn or Twitter. I messaged her on Twitter, and I said, I'm an Aussie founder in SF. Love to tell you about what I'm building. And it was enough to sort of get a coffee with her. And she said that she had written a thesis about frictionless finance, which was the exact business that we're building, and like exactly in line with the company mission. And she loved it. She wanted to angel invest in the company, and also I asked if she can introduce me to a couple of like VCs that she knows, and I said sure. And the first one was a guy named Jan Hammer out of Index Ventures, and he's rated the #1 fintech investor in the world. He actually lives in London, but he was in America on Labor Day last year, in September last year. And the two of us had breakfast, and in our first breakfast, he asked if he can lead the seed round in the company, a pre-seed round in the company. So he led a $2.5 million pre-seed that closed in October. So Index Ventures invested two of the $2.5 million, and Jan, he was the one who led rounds in Adyen and Robinhood, TransferWise, a lot of like really interesting large fintechs. And and so it was quite organic, really, how we raised that round. We had a couple other funds participate in that, but majority was taken by Index Ventures. But even actually before that round, when I first arrived in Silicon Valley, pretty much the only person I had previously had an introduction to was a guy named Brian Sugar. And so Nick Molnar, who's the ex-CEO of Afterpay, the founder and the head of North America for Afterpay, or CEO of North America for Afterpay. He introduced me to Brian Sugar before I left Australia, and said, he's an interesting guy. He was like an advisor to Afterpay in the US, big media guy. He started Pop Sugar here, which is a large media company. And anyway, I caught up with him for a couple of beers in San Francisco, and he said, "Have you spoken with the Stripe team? You should speak to them. Interesting what you're doing. One quick checkout." And I spoke with the Stripe team, and I spoke to them really early, like before we raised our pre-seed. I thought they were a really interesting company, doing very complementary to us. They're building the business side of payments, we're the consumer side of payments, and I really like the team. Obviously, I've been a Stripe customer for like 10 years, so definitely understood the product and the vision, and got to know them more over the last over a few months, and met more of their team, and so in late last year, actually it was New Year's Eve, I met with the Stripe team and actually did the deal for our round. We officially closed in March, but it was really organic both times. We actually sort of got preempted with offers for both rounds. and we're very fortunate to get like very strong backing from very well respected investors. Yeah, so it's a little bit different, and I have seen I've sort of looked at fundraising in Australia before for different businesses, and definitely know how tough fundraising can be anywhere in the world. And America is the same. I don't think our experience was necessarily the same experience that most founders have, but and not the same experience I've had with other businesses before. But I think it's testament to the sort of product that we're building and the market timing and execution we've had today.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I just wanted to sort of highlight that you mentioned when you reached out to Alison was that she had written a thesis on sort of frictionless finance as well. So, I guess one of the things that, founders often get caught up in is just reaching out to anyone that they think has capital to invest without really whether they're potentially the right partners or not. You kind of spoke about a couple of the introductions that, obviously Alison made, and then getting introduced to the Stripe team as well. Yeah. What was it specifically that you were sort of looking for from an investment partner or from a VC partner to kind of join you on the journey?
And again, without Alison, I wasn't even looking for money. I wasn't looking for a founder. Like I said, a lot of it was just coming. What I was trying to do was build networks in Silicon Valley, right, and build networks here and locally, and help set up, and potentially as a potential employee or something like that, right? And really, you need a whole army of people. We've got a whole army of people supporting us and like building us now. The reality was, I knew then that we needed to build a whole army of people to help and grow the company. And that's all I was looking for. Like, who could be helpful in any way? Who knows what way that is? And I think that a lot of people think that cash is the only way for people to do that. But oftentimes there's a lot of different things. We're just a connection into somebody else, or I have lots of amazing random connections now that come from people I met in the first few weeks of being here, or in the first few months, or yesterday. So really, I think that it shouldn't just be capital that you're after. And if you go in really transactionally, like this place is a place built on relationships. That's why networking is really important, not the type of networking where you go to an event and hand out business cards afterwards, and is like really organic networking. And it is a place built on relationships. It's amazing the people that we can, I'm 2 connections away from anybody. I can have a cup of coffee with virtually anyone in this place now. And it's really amazing. So if you come in as an outsider, someone, as an Australian who's, I'm going to come over for 2 weeks and go and raise a whole bunch of money and come in very transactionally, it's just not going to work. I, in fact, haven't seen anyone that's successful yet. I think you really need to spend time here and get to know people. And that's why, in June, I just came here and stayed in a hotel and was like, I'm just going to be here on the ground and meet people. So I think that that's the right strategy. Now, to answer your question about the types of people, this, I think that Stripe obviously let out Series A in March this year. They invested 15 of a $20 million round, and very much strategic partners to us. Stripe, have the opportunity to give us incredible amounts of distribution across the internet, right? One of the largest sort of internet, internet companies who has their, technology sitting in millions and millions of merchant sites around the world, and sites that, use Stripe to power payments. So for us, incredible distribution opportunity to have fast buttons being distributed through those pipes to millions and millions of merchants. So being aligned with them and aligning them, not just as an investor, but as a distribution channel, is a no-brainer for us. And love the people and love that side of it. When you're talking about VCs more traditionally, or any sort of investors, they can provide extra value, and that's great. The 2 primary benefits that you get out of an investor is cash and terms. And I really want all founders to understand that. It's not to say that there aren't any additional benefits, but that has to be the primary benefit. And anyone who's trying to sell you on secondary benefits as the primary benefit from a financial transaction is really trying to change the deals. A bank can have whatever they like, as the terms for a credit card. The rate of the credit card is the most important thing. And the same thing is true for VC and investment. But that's not to say, I tell you what, we've had investors. I would say Jan at Index has been one of the most helpful investors I've ever met. It really is a phenomenal investor. I would go back, and I met almost every VC in the world at this point. And I think he's been a truly great partner. And so I do think that there are much better investors than others, but the primary thing that you want to look for out of a financial transaction is the financial side of the transaction.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you mentioned, especially in terms of your approach, has been kind of really thinking about it from a building a network and building a relationship perspective. And obviously, you and both Fast have kind of been sort of known for being really good at building relationships with people through Twitter, or through kind of social media channels as well. And a big part of that, I think, is you've obviously been extremely sort of transparent and open in terms of the challenges and kind of the growth and the opportunities and things like that. It's actually something that we spoke about on an interview recently with Tim Doyle as well, about just talking about what a great job that you've done in terms of that. But just really wondering from your perspective, in terms of, was that something that kind of organically happened, or has that been a strategic decision for you as well? Especially for the type of product that you have, and the way that a lot of people approach it is, we'll kind of build in stealth and then we'll eventually sort of launch. But you've kind of taken the other approach. How, I guess, important and how strategic was that decision in terms of how you've approached your sort of go-to-market strategy?
Yeah, so it's been completely organic. I say all the time, if somebody had told me 18 months ago that we would have like the following that we do now, I probably wouldn't have believed them. It's just not really my style. But it's been really important for us, as in it's been a highly successful lever that we pulled. It's not something that we thought was really important for us, like at the start of the business. The reality is, the talent, there's a lot of talent here, right? Like we've spoken about, one of the two major reasons for coming here, but the larger of the two, is for the talent, the ecosystem of very relevant and highly skilled talent. Now, it's also the most competitive job market in the world for that talent, right? You think of every large tech company that's here, every successful startup that's here, there's probably 1,000 startups in the city right now, but probably more. And so really, this talent has the absolute pick of where they want to work, and they command very, very high salaries, right? And large packages and all the bonuses and perks and everything else. And so for us, as soon as we raised pre-seed, went, all right, we need to hire, build our team. How are we going to, and I don't have, as I'm building networks as fast as I can, I don't have massive networks. I didn't go to Stanford, and know 500 other students that, I can go and call upon. So where do we find, how do we attract talent? And so we decided to use social, we decided to use video, decided to use content, and be purely to attract talent, right? How do we, what can we put out that will tell people and blatantly tell people that we're looking to build a team, and how can we tell them what we're doing, and how can we message to them like how we're doing it and the culture that we're building, whatever else. And that's what we did. And we're really loud purely for the focus of hiring. And we built a really fantastic team in a fairly short amount of time. And everyone's come from has got phenomenal backgrounds and really humble working with the group of people we are. But the reality was, not only were we successful in hiring, and although we're still starving for more great people, but the reality is that it wasn't just candidates that saw what we were doing, right? Is that the general public saw what we were doing, the investment community saw what we were doing, media and consumers and e-commerce, and lots of really I think we caught the attention of a lot of people, and that was purely a side effect of it. I literally hadn't heard the term building in public 12 months ago. I wouldn't have thought it was a thing. I wouldn't have even considered that's what we were doing, to be frank. We were just trying to tell people what we were doing to attract people to come help us. And so, it caught the attention. The other thing I think is that this is a product that every single person wants, right? The idea of having one-click checkout, the idea of just having a button when you want something, click it and it's done, is the nirvana, right? The idea of one-click login is the nirvana. This is the future we all want. The identity network that we want to build, so that if you move address, you just update fast, and we'll tell your bank you moved address, we'll tell your telco, we'll tell everyone else. That's the nirvana for consumers. And so everyone relates to this. We hear all the time from people who say that we're their mum's favorite tech company because we're the first tech company she's ever understood what they do. And I think that the fact that we relate like that to people is one of the reasons why we are so prolific. Just because not only do we build in public, not only are we loud, not only do people get to follow along, but it's a product that they want to use, and their mums want to use, and their parents want to use, and their brothers and sisters want to use, and their partners want to use. And it's just got this sort of mainstream adoption that really cuts through.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that because, I heard in a previous interview that you spoke about, a lot of what you sort of communicate to the team is, how do we, build this as a product that Middle America loves and that sort of grandmas start using as well. How do you
Yeah.
sort of make that into kind of the culture of the team or kind of the culture of that you're trying to do in terms of like building around the product as well?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot. Some of this stuff is like really, I wouldn't even say easy and obvious, but some of it is like, is the font that we're using big enough? Like, stop trying to be cute because this isn't a product that's just built for 20-year-olds in San Francisco. Some of this stuff is like everything that you see of ours should smack you in the face, and it's just obvious. Right? No one should need to train you. The idea is a 70-year-old in Middle America or in Sydney or in Brisbane or whatever should just be able to use this product sight unseen for the first time. The button says fast checkout. Like it doesn't take anyone to sort of explain what that's going to do. When you click it, it's a checkout form the first time, and it just takes your information. The second time when you click it, it's one-click checkout. It is designed to serve not the lowest common denominator, but the average person, like the everyday person who maybe struggles through checkout or maybe just hates standard forms. And I think a lot of that is like UI and UX design, and it's really important to think like we're designing for everyone. Is this something that makes sense to us because we're working in the computer industry and the tech industry, or is this something that is actually just obvious? And then asking people and kind of seeing. I love saying to people, go show your grandma and just ask her, like, grandma, do you know what this looks like? I say to my designers all the time, Tom, go send the photo to your grandma and ask her if she knows what this screen would do. And then he normally comes back and he's like, yeah, she didn't, so I'll change it. And I think that's like a really great like sensory test as to like how easy is what you're building to be used by anyone. And I think it's a really easy way of doing it. I think that like culturally, there's lots of things you can do internally, and I like to think that we want to have a team that's like definitely representative of like our whole audience. We've got people in 5 countries now, from different walks of life, and I think that's really important to build a team that like represents your consumer base as well.
Yeah, obviously we've kind of spoken about it from a product approach, but one of the other things that really sort of struck out to me from a previous interview that you mentioned was that obviously through a lot of the brand that you're sort of building online, you're getting a lot of inbound leads, but you've, to my understanding, directed your team to kind of not touch the inbound leads at all, but really focus on building your sort of outbound playbook. Again, do you want to kind of share why that's been a really sort of important approach for you and why you've played such a high emphasis on doing that?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of people who love what we're doing online, right? We have a great social following or whatever else. But again, this is kind of like where you hear about like Silicon Valley bubbles. We can build a really strong like initial network from like this group of people. But the reality is that group of people isn't the entire world, right? That group of people is a fairly small part of the overall global population. So how are we going to scale to the overall global population? And it's from finding channels that can actually, reach mass market, right? And be able to scale through them. And outbound sales is a great channel to do that. E-commerce is this fantastic sector where every single e-commerce site is public, right? I can actually see we track a list of every e-commerce site in the world in Salesforce. We track what technology they're running on, what other technology, what e-commerce platform they're running on, what payment products they have. We can match with Zoom Info and LinkedIn and like Clearbit and like look at stakeholders in every one of these organizations we want to target. Now, those companies, most of those companies aren't following us on Twitter or Instagram or, whatever, or like messaging us and, wearing our hoodies and stuff. Most of those companies are out doing their own thing. The hardware store in Middle America, who's got like a 50-year-old who's just been running it for like 20 years, they're not following us on Twitter. They're out running their hardware store. And those hardware stores don't have, Apple Pay or whatever else on them either, because it's just not their business to be like up with the latest payment technologies, right? They're running a hardware store. So how are they going to adopt fast? They're not going to adopt fast because they're coming in, they've seen a video of ours and they're like, this is such a cool company, I'm going to put it on our site. They're going to hear about us because we're reaching them and we're saying, hey, we'd love to put this button on your site because it makes your life easier. And so building that function is critically important if we actually want to scale across the internet, right? If we actually want to scale to serve every consumer or billions of consumers, that's what it's going to take. And so we have to get good at that function. We have to learn how to scale outbound sales, or else we're never going to be successful in that sort of blanket coverage. And so that's what we did really early, is go just focus on building that function out, and don't worry about inbound, because it's going to keep coming. And like it's all coming from the group of people who we're talking to all the time. So we already know them, they're already here. Let's build into the channels that we aren't currently talking to. And we did that, really successfully to start. And I think, it's why it's no surprise we're actually growing really fast, is that we have this very scalable way of growing now. And a really clear path to serving the whole world. And we just want to continue scaling that.
Yeah, one of the things that really sort of strikes me about, the most successful companies and obviously founders that I've had on the show is often the best communicators are ones that keep things really simple and have a way of kind of distilling really complex things into something that's really bite-sized and easy to understand. Obviously that's really important from a hiring perspective, so that people can get that, or from people being able to share things by word of mouth, but also, even the way that you've kind of spoken about how you sort of make decisions internally from your team members. Oftentimes there's multiple different things going on. If you keep things really simple, like, how do we create something that grandmas can use? It makes that kind of process of prioritizing things fairly straightforward for people when they're having to make sort of micro decisions themselves. Do you have any advice in terms of, what that process looks like for you in terms of how you distill what that message is for fast internally, and how you sort of have that very clear message in terms of what you do and what you stand for? But also, how do you sort of come and prioritize and kind of help the team focus with kind of very clear messaging in terms of what you're trying to build internally?
Yeah, a lot of complex thoughts there. I think part of it is finding complementary people to work on a team as well, right? And I think companies have different stages, and you'll probably find that we have partly because of my character, partly because of the DNA of the company we've already built, is that we probably are very good at finding people who can follow this train of execution, where we can have this sort of clarity of understanding over what we're building, and able to make decisions quickly to kind of pursue that agenda. But I think the reality is that we have a very clear, I would say, if you spoke to anyone in our company, they can tell you not just like what our product does, they can tell you the whole history of the company, and exactly where we're going, and exactly what we're building, and all the way to get there, right? And we talk about it publicly like a lot, so it's not like a secret. But I think that everyone has this very clear understanding. And the reality is that, part of it is that we do want to be able to articulate it quite simply. But I think also just fundamentally, it's a simple concept, what we're doing, right? Is that there's a lot of very difficult work to get there. But the reality is, we just want to be the source of truth for consumers' identities, right? And the reason that that's important is so that you can have one-click login, because there's no point in typing your email address again or using a password. You're just accessing, the source of truth you've already built. You don't have to keep filling in forms with the same information over and over, because once you've given us the information once, then we can just share that more easily with other systems that you need to interface with. There's no reason for you to keep typing your credit card information in, because once you've given us your payment information, then we can share that with others quite simply. This is as a mission is quite simple. And this is why it makes sense for everyone. Like, in fact, it's like, why, of course that makes sense. Like, why isn't that just the way it is? Like, why when you go into the doctor, do we still fill in paper forms? It just, like, that's what doesn't make sense. Like, the state of the world today is the thing that is weird. It's like what we're building is the thing that makes sense. It's like, why is no one else having been able to build this already? And so, every small decision needs to be getting us closer to that goal. And I think the more complex you make things, the kind of slower that process is, or the further away from that you get. So, we prioritize people moving quickly. Fast growing company, we set short deadlines, horrifically short deadlines for a lot of stuff. And, we just prioritize execution. And anything that is like seems too complex typically is, most things actually aren't all that complex. And a lot of people who introduce complexity, it's normally just for complexity's sake rather than anything else.
So final two-part question for me before we shift gears to audience Q&A. So for those of you that are tuning in live, as I mentioned earlier, there's a little Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen if you have any questions for Domm. So Domm, one of the things you just mentioned was, obviously you want to attract the type of people that kind of follow your sort of similar train of thought. And, part of that will be a filtering process. People that are sort of attracted to the way that you communicate will obviously, and attracted to what you do will obviously sort of naturally reach out. So the first part of my question is, what are some of the ways that you sort of look at identifying particular characteristics if you're trying to onboard the right people? Obviously I assume that there's a lot of people that want to come in and sort of join you on the journey. What are the things that you specifically look for to make sure that they're the right fit for you? And the second part is, you mentioned in terms of just being very clear in terms of your communication and everyone in the team being able to kind of talk about the history of the product and where you're going. Is there anything that you do internally to help structure that or create that? Like, is there any documentation or kind of playbooks, or is that just something that you sort of communicate over and over again?
Yeah, we're getting better at this. Obviously, as an early company, we don't have everything perfect and every system in place and so forth. And nor should we. Some things you just want to kind of leave a little bit organic. Some things you need to document the bigger you get. I think it really depends on the role and stage. Like even growing really quickly, like we're building new functions within our business that didn't exist before, right? And we'll meet great people who actually could be really good candidates to work in this function who we say no to today. And I mean like very good, highly skilled people who would be great and we would love to work in this company, who we say no to because they're not right to be the first person in this function. The first person that comes into the function needs to be able to come in and set and build the infrastructure, right? They need to come in, they need to have seen what does a successful rollout of this function look like from another company, right? What have I seen that's worked? Where have I worked that did this well? Ideally a couple of places, what worked, and then go set that up and then ignore what didn't work. If you go and bring in someone to lead like a function or be the first person in a function that doesn't exist and that doesn't have that background, then sure, like maybe they can bubble their way there. One, it's slower. And then two, they're probably going to make a whole bunch of mistakes that somebody with experience just wouldn't make. And so, whereas if you've got a function that has 20 people in it, then you probably don't have to worry about that, right? You can just get people in who can just, add incremental value within that team. So it really depends on like the stage. And again, like I said, we have functions that do have 20 people and we have functions that have nobody and we have functions that have one person. And so it really changes. The dynamic of the person that you want changes, dramatically depending on the life stage of not just our company as a whole, but that function. And so that's like a really big, thing that we consider because otherwise you're setting people up to fail, right? And we're setting ourselves up to fail, or again, we're just like growing slower than how fast we could possibly grow. And anyway, and so that kind of sets us up in good stead. We look at values. I do prioritize, energy. I think in an early stage company, you need to be highly energetic. It's just one of those things. If you're not, it's going to like get really tiring really quickly. And so that is one. But we got a range of values that we sort of that we compare people to. But I think because we are so open, building in public or building out loud, as we say internally now, is one. Speed is one, but speed through efficiency, not speed through haste. There's and a number of these things we sort of gauge candidates on. But again, depending on the size of the team, some are less important than others. Some are leadership qualities, and not everyone needs to be in leadership. Not everyone is going to be a people leader. Some people are technical leaders or function leaders, or just happy just being ICs. And but I think one of the fact that we put out so much content, the fact that we are so public, really helps to like set the tone of the type of company we are, the type of team that we have. And typically people, resonate with that first. I think one, red flag is normally someone who hasn't seen anything about us and know almost nothing about us and haven't seen any content and don't know anything, don't know what we're like at all because they've taken not 2 minutes to like have a look at the company. And that's probably the biggest red flag. But yeah. And the other thing is you don't want everyone, I say all the time, we absolutely don't want everyone to be like me, right? You don't want everyone to be a 30-something-year-old, white guy, Silicon Valley now or anywhere. We definitely want to be representative of different thoughts and whatever. So we want like common traits and values, which will make it easier to grow a business. But you want different lines of thought. You want people who speak different languages. You want people who've had different cultural experiences, because otherwise, we're going to build a product that's suited for 33-year-old white men. And we don't want to build a product that's just suited for 33-year-old white men. We want everyone in the whole world to use this product. And so we absolutely do need people that are representative of lots of different cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. Shared vision and values and diversity of thought. Love that. So going to shift gears to audience Q&A. First question is from Ahmed Ibrahim, who says, as a founder still working on your product, how would you connect to investors to pitch your ideas to them?
Yeah, I mean, you'll always be working on your product. I don't think we'll ever stop working on our product. I don't know any companies that stop working on their product. So I don't think that's an issue. And I can tell you, if you're an early stage company, investors aren't really actually, gauging you on the quality of your product. Often, most of the investors that invested in us or that looked at us had never looked at the product, and the whole time through the investment process, even after money was wide, had never seen the product. Because in an early stage, actually isn't based on the quality of your product. It's based on the problem that you're solving, the solution that you're proposing, how big the potential market is, and whether or not they think that you're going to be able to go and execute on that problem, on that solution. That's what matters. Even the nuance as to the solution itself can likely change, but does the problem exist, and is it a really, really big problem? If those two things are true and they believe that you will be good at executing, that's really the conviction that they need. So regardless of the state of the product. Now, that's not to say that you can just go to them with an idea and expect that they're going to find you. They don't, because an easy screener for investors is to see how well you've executed on getting a product version up, or customers to use a product version. Doesn't matter if the thing is like the worst product in the world. If people are using it, if you manage to get people to use it and solve their problem, with the duct taped piece of crap that you've got, then that's a strong conviction sign for investors. But if you haven't got to that stage, then they can't get that proof point.
Next question is from Stefan Dunjic. He says, what's the difference between marketing and selling the identity layer versus the checkout? Do you need to invest in direct B2C efforts, or are you relying on your customers for this?
We never sell the identity solution. We only ever sell checkout, right? As you know, we are a very secure platform, and consumers don't care about security, right? They don't want to hear about the future. Consumers want to hear about now. People want to hear what can you do for them right now. And again, if we don't execute well now, if we don't get lots of people using the product now, then we'll never build, a great identity network. We'll never get there. So all that matters is now. And this is where you need to be able to have a strong vision, but then be relentlessly focused on executing right now. And that's the most important thing. So we just sell checkout, right? One-click checkout is more than enough value for both sellers and buyers, right? Every seller wants one-click checkout. Every buyer wants one-click checkout. So that's what we focus on selling.
Next question is from Kevin McDonald, who asks, what impact has Fast had on chargebacks, especially on the sale of digital products? Does it help merchants fight friendly fraud?
Yeah, so the short answer is, we've had less chargebacks than your average payment processor by far. But the longer answer is that would be normal, because chargebacks can take up to 90 days to come. And, we've only launched sort of 7 weeks ago or something like that. So we're not even sort of into a full cycle, but, obviously trending in the right direction. The reality is we definitely long-term oppose to drastically reduce fraud and chargebacks because we have this sort of identity network that sits in between. But again, it's not our primary benefit. We're not outselling that. Our primary driver for merchants is increasing sales, not in decreasing fraud. And so it's not that we don't have that as a benefit, but we're more focused on for the seller side of increasing sales, for the buyer side of making it easier to buy things. If you make it easy, talking about simple things. If you make it easy for people to buy things, more people will buy things. It's it's a no-brainer, and so that's what we focus on as our primary value.
Next question is from Jack Ryan, who says, leading no-code e-com platforms for those starting up that want to use Fast, what would you recommend? Squarespace, Shopify, Editor, others?
Big commerce. I mean, there's not much that's no code. They're mostly low code. Squarespace is probably a no code. Shopify is not a no code. BigCommerce isn't a no code, but they're low code. I would go BigCommerce, and you can install Fast straight away. If you go to bigcommerce.com/DM/fast, you can sign up for BigCommerce and Fast at the same time.
Perfect. I'll make sure I'll add that link to the show note. Last question, Dom. I know that you've got another meeting to head to as well. So we're going to finish off with a question from Anton Eliasson. He says, how do you prioritize US versus Asia expansion, or is EMEA up next after US? So I guess when you think about sort of global expansion or kind of attacking the international market, what's your approach?
Well, I'm here in the US. I can tell you the US is our first market, our first major market. In saying that, I'm always thinking inherently globally. Obviously I'm Australian here in another country, so I kind of think naturally about like the wider world. We already support merchants in 42 countries. So if you're a seller, you can sign up for Fast today and use it, even if your business is based in 40 countries. In the 42 of the major markets. And as a buyer, you can use Fast all around the world, right? Anyone who's got a credit card can use Fast. And so we already support like a very global audience. Obviously our business, we focus on specific markets because we need to, build networks and spend our marketing and sales time wisely. So US or North America is our sort of primary focus right now, but we do have sellers in I think 5 or 6 countries already. And we're looking to grow that. Europe is definitely an interesting place, and one that we're going to be looking to expand greatly to over the next, 12 months. But so is Asia. And the reality is that we're aggressively expanding right across the world. And really, we'll look for pockets, that will pockets of usage that really sort of stand out and key merchant relationships and grow as they take us. Yeah.
Fantastic. On that note, thank you to all of you for joining us for this live podcast. And Dom, once again, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your experience and insights.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. Dom, before we go, if anyone wants to check out Fast, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can either go to fast.co, that's our website, or go to twitter.com/fast or @fast. And then, or you can follow me on Twitter @Domm, DOMM.
Perfect. I'll make sure all of those links are in the show notes at startupplaybook.co. Once again, Dom, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Great. Thanks for having me. Bye.
Thanks for listening to episode 131 of the Startup Playbook podcast. As always, full show notes from this interview will be available at startupplaybook.co. I'll be back at 8 a.m. next Tuesday, the 27th of October, with another live episode. And my guest for episode 132 is the founder and CEO of Practice Ignition, Guy Pearson. I'm really looking forward to that interview and hope that you can join us. But in the meantime, if you enjoyed this interview, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.